Your payment method has been declined. The woman at the Disney resort desk said loudly enough for half the lobby to hear. And at that exact moment, my son finally realized the credit card his wife had been using all week no longer worked. I was sitting alone in my kitchen in Tampa, Florida, when Ethan called me for the 14th time that morning. The afternoon rain tapped softly against my windows, and the tea beside my hand had already gone cold. His name kept flashing across my phone screen over and over, desperate now, no longer confident. I stared at it for a long moment before finally silencing the ringer again. For 3 days, they had been posting smiling pictures from Disney World while draining my retirement account like it belonged to them. And for 3 days, they thought I knew nothing. Brittany had uploaded dozens of photos already. Matching family shirts in front of Cinderella Castle. Steak dinners at expensive restaurants inside the parks. VIP tours with private guides. Shopping bags hanging from her arms like trophies. Every photo looked polished enough for a magazine. Every caption sounded fake to me now. Making magical memories with family, she had written the night before beneath a picture of Ethan and little Lily watching fireworks over the castle lagoon. Family. That word sat strangely in my chest these days. Because while they were sipping cocktails beside resort pools and buying Minnie Mouse ears that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I had spent the last month comparing prices on blood pressure medication at 3 different pharmacies. Funny how quickly family can forget who quietly carried them for years. I never imagined my own son would become one of those people. Ethan used to call me every Sunday afternoon without fail. Even after his father passed away 8 years ago, he still checked in. He used to ask if I needed anything from the store. Used to bring over takeout containers when he thought I looked tired. Then he married Brittany Collins, and little by little, everything changed so slowly I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The calls became shorter. The visits became rare. Somehow, every conversation started circling back to money, retirement accounts, property taxes, credit limits. Brittany had a way of asking questions that sounded innocent until hours later when you realized she had been collecting information the entire time. "You still use the same bank, Margaret?" she had once asked while helping me clear dishes after Thanksgiving dinner. "You really should let Ethan help organize your finances someday. Seniors get targeted all the time." Seniors. I remember how cold that word sounded coming from her mouth. Not Margaret. Not Mom. Just seniors. Like I was already halfway incompetent in her mind. 2 nights ago, I received the first fraud alert from my bank. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake. A luxury resort charge for $1,842. Then another one appeared 10 minutes later for park tickets and dining packages. Then another. And another. I sat frozen at my kitchen table watching the notifications stack one after another across my phone screen, while Brittany posted smiling videos online from inside the happiest place on earth. My card. My account. My money. I remember staring out my back window at the wet Florida palm trees bending in the wind while something inside me slowly shifted. Not anger at first. Not even heartbreak. Just clarity. A quiet kind of clarity that settles over a person when they finally stop making excuses for people who never deserved their loyalty in the first place. By the next morning, I had called the bank. I had not walked into a bank branch in nearly 6 months before that Thursday morning. Most days I handled everything online from the old desktop computer sitting in the corner of my living room beside the bookshelf Harold built for me back in 1998. But this felt different. Too important for phone calls and passwords. The Florida heat wrapped around me the moment I stepped out of my car in the parking lot. Even at 9 in the morning, the air felt heavy enough to press against my chest. Inside the bank, everything smelled faintly of coffee and air conditioning. A young man at the front desk smiled politely when I explained I needed help reviewing several suspicious charges on my account. He guided me toward one of the glass offices near the back where a woman with silver-framed glasses looked up from her computer and blinked twice when she saw my name on the appointment screen. "Margaret Collins?" she asked softly. "I do not know if you remember me, but I used to help your husband with the business account years ago." Her name was Grace Miller. I remembered her immediately after she smiled. She had worked there forever, always calm, always patient with Harold when he spent 20 minutes balancing every receipt by hand before depositing anything. Seeing a familiar face made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Grace noticed it too, but kindly pretended not to. She closed the office door behind me and offered me bottled water before sitting down across from me with a tablet in her hands. "Tell me everything from the beginning," she said gently. So I did. I explained the Disney charges, the notifications, the sudden realization that my son and daughter-in-law were using my account without permission. I expected embarrassment while saying it aloud, but what surprised me most was how numb I sounded. Like I was describing somebody else's family instead of my own. Grace listened without interrupting once. Then she turned the tablet screen toward herself and began reviewing the account history carefully. Her expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatic, just small movements. A tighter mouth, a slower blink. The kind of face people make when they discover something unpleasant but are trying not to alarm you too quickly. "Margaret," she said after several quiet minutes, "did you authorize an additional user on this account last fall?" I stared at her. "No," she tapped the screen again. "There is a secondary card connected under Brittany Collins." For a second, I genuinely thought she had confused my account with someone else's. I even gave a little laugh because the alternative felt too absurd to process. "That cannot be right," I said. "I never approved that." Grace turned the screen toward me then. There it was in black and white. Authorized user added 8 months earlier. Brittany Collins. Same mailing address as Ethan and Brittany's home outside Orlando. My stomach dropped so suddenly. I had to grip the armrest beside me. 8 months. 8 months they had access to my credit line, while sitting across from me at birthdays and holiday dinners, pretending nothing was wrong. Grace kept speaking carefully, professionally. "There is also an electronic authorization signature attached to the request." She hesitated before adding, "It was submitted online." I looked at the signature on the screen. My name, Margaret and Collins. But it was not mine. Something about the letters felt stiff and unnatural. Whoever did it had copied my signature from documents somewhere. Old tax papers maybe. Medical forms. I suddenly remembered Brittany offering to help organize paperwork in my office last Christmas while I was cooking dinner in the kitchen. At the time I thought she was being thoughtful, helpful. God, I felt stupid sitting there. Not because they stole from me. Because I had trusted them enough to leave the door open in the first place. Grace continued reviewing the transactions. Disney was only the beginning. Salon appointments in Winter Park. Luxury outlet stores. Resort deposits. Airline upgrades. Small purchases scattered carefully over months so they would not attract immediate attention. $100 here. $200 there. Then larger amounts once they grew comfortable. Nearly $38,000 in total. I remember staring through the glass wall of Grace's office toward the lobby where people moved in and out carrying coffee cups and deposit slips, while my entire understanding of my family quietly collapsed around me. The strange thing about betrayal is that the truth does not usually arrive all at once. It arrives piece by piece. A comment you ignored 6 months ago. A strange look across the dinner table. A question about passwords that suddenly means something different. And sitting there beneath the cold air conditioning with my dead husband's old banker looking at me with pure pity in her eyes, I finally understood something I had been avoiding for years. This was never an accident. It was a system. Grace printed every transaction and placed the stack of papers carefully into a plain manila folder like she was handling medical records after a difficult diagnosis. I sat there quietly flipping through page after page while the fluorescent lights hummed softly above us. The charges blurred together after a while. Boutique hotels in Miami. Spa packages. Designer clothing stores I had only ever seen in magazines at the grocery checkout line. One charge stopped me cold though. $487 at a jewelry store in Orlando 3 days before Christmas. I remembered that necklace. Brittany wore it to dinner on Christmas Eve tucked perfectly against the collarbone of her cream-colored sweater while she smiled across my dining table and asked if I needed help wrapping leftovers. "You have to start spending money on yourself, Margaret," she had told me that night while touching the gold chain around her neck. Life is short. At the time I thought it was strange advice coming from someone half my age. Now I understood why she said it. She was already spending mine. Grace eventually asked whether I wanted to file immediate fraud charges with the bank. The words hung in the air between us heavier than I expected. Fraud charges. Against my own son's household. Against the mother of my granddaughter. I looked down at my wedding ring and slowly turned it around my finger the way I always did when I felt overwhelmed. Harold used to notice that habit whenever I was anxious. "You only twist that ring when your heart already knows the answer," he once told me years ago. God, I missed him in that moment. Not because he could fix this. Nobody could fix this anymore. But because he would have understood the silence I was sitting in. Grace did not pressure me. She only folded her hands together and waited. Finally, I asked one question. How long do people usually get away with something like this before they stop feeling guilty? Grace looked at me sadly. Usually around the time they convince themselves they deserve it. That answer stayed with me the entire drive home. Rain clouds had started gathering again over Tampa Bay by then, dark and heavy against the afternoon sky. Traffic moved slowly along the interstate, while I replayed years of conversations in my head with painful new clarity. Brittany insisting she should handle restaurant bills before quietly handing the server my card instead of hers. Ethan encouraging me to switch to paperless statements because mail theft is getting bad. Brittany volunteering to help me reset banking passwords because technology stresses seniors out. Every helpful gesture suddenly looked different when placed beside $38,000 in hidden charges. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone already showed 3 missed calls from Ethan and 2 from Brittany. I did not listen to the voicemails. Instead, I carried the folder inside and placed it carefully on the kitchen table beside Harold's old reading glasses that still sat there most mornings out of habit. The house felt unusually quiet around me. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. The kind that settles into corners after years of realizing you are the only person left protecting the home you built. I made myself a turkey sandwich even though I was not hungry because old habits are hard to break at 68 years old. Then I sat at the table and opened Facebook for the first time all day. Brittany had posted another set of Disney photos barely 20 minutes earlier. Ethan stood beside Lily wearing matching Mickey Mouse shirts while fireworks exploded across the sky behind them in bright blue and gold. Lily looked happy. Truly happy. That hurt more than anything else because none of this was her fault. Beneath the photo, Brittany wrote, "Making memories with the people who matter most." More than 200 people had liked the post already. Friends commenting heart emojis. Former co-workers saying they were living the dream. Nobody looking at those pictures would have guessed the entire vacation was being funded by a woman sitting alone in a quiet house eating a dry sandwich beside unpaid pharmacy bills. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally noticing something small in the corner of Brittany's newest photo. A shopping bag from the same luxury jewelry store listed in my transaction folder. She was carrying it proudly on her arm like a prize. And for the first time since this nightmare began, something inside me stopped hurting and started hardening instead. That night, I barely slept. The storm outside rolled across Tampa for hours, rattling the old windows in the guest bedroom and washing the streets in silver reflections from the streetlights. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest and wandered downstairs in my robe. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence while I stood staring at the folder Grace had given me earlier that day. $38,000. I whispered the number once under my breath because somehow hearing it aloud made it feel more real. Harold and I spent 40 years building careful habits around money. Not because we were wealthy, but because we knew what it felt like to have none. Harold grew up in a tiny apartment above a hardware store in Mobile, Alabama, where his mother reused tea bags to save pennies. My own parents survived on canned vegetables and overtime shifts after the factory layoffs back in the 70s. We built our life slowly together. Every vacation carefully planned. Every mortgage payment made on time. We skipped luxuries for years so Ethan could attend a good college without drowning in student loans. And now I was sitting alone at 68 years old realizing the people we sacrificed for viewed our savings account like a community resource. I poured myself coffee even though it was too late for caffeine and sat down beside the dark kitchen window. Across the yard, rainwater dripped steadily from the palm trees into the soaked grass below. Everything looked blurred and gray outside. Quiet. The kind of lonely quiet that only widows really understand. I kept thinking about Ethan as a little boy. 8 years old with missing front teeth and grass stains on his sneakers running through this same backyard, carrying toy dinosaurs in both hands. He used to save half his Halloween candy for me because he knew peanut butter cups were my favorite. When he got his first real paycheck at 16 from working weekends at Publix, he bought me a grocery store bouquet with his own money. Daisies. Cheap flowers wrapped in plastic. I cried in the car after he handed them to me because I remember thinking I had raised a kind man. Somewhere along the way that boy disappeared. Or maybe he just learned how easy it was to let somebody else become the villain for him. Brittany never forced Ethan into anything. That was the lie I almost told myself to feel better. Ethan knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every charge. But deep down he knew enough. Men do not accidentally vacation inside luxury Disney resorts using money they cannot afford without asking questions. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed again across the kitchen counter. Another message from Brittany this time. Margaret, please call us back. There is some confusion with the bank, and Ethan is getting really stressed. Confusion. I stared at that word for a long time. It amazed me how carefully people choose language when they still believe they can control the story. Not theft. Not fraud. Just confusion. I did not answer. Instead, I opened her social media page again. New videos had appeared overnight. Brittany laughing beside the hotel pool wrapped in a white cover-up while Lily splashed in the water behind her. Ethan holding giant souvenir bags outside a gift shop. Expensive dinners glowing under restaurant lights. In every video, Brittany spoke with that same polished, cheerful voice influencers use online when they want strangers to envy their lives. Watching it now felt surreal. Like seeing actors perform happiness inside a movie built from my bank account. Then I noticed the comments underneath one of the posts. You are so lucky your mother-in-law spoils you guys like this, somebody wrote. Brittany replied with a laughing emoji and the words, she loves helping family. I felt something inside me finally settle into place then. Not rage. Rage burns too fast. What I felt was colder than that. Clearer. I closed the app slowly and carried my coffee mug to the sink. Outside, dawn had started creeping into the sky in pale shades of blue over the wet Florida streets. The storm was finally passing. And standing there in the quiet kitchen Harold and I once filled with birthday cakes and school lunches and Sunday morning pancakes, I made a decision. I was done protecting people who had never once protected me. By noon the next day, the calls had stopped completely. That silence told me more than the panic ever could. People only stop calling when they realize the situation is real. I spent the morning doing ordinary things because ordinary things felt important suddenly. I watered the plants on the back patio, folded laundry, refilled the bird feeder Harold installed years ago outside the kitchen window. The cardinals still came every morning around 10. 2 bright red birds hopping carefully along the edge of the feeder while the neighborhood stayed quiet around them. Life has a strange way of continuing even when your heart feels split open. Around 1 in the afternoon, I sat down with the folder from the bank again and started reading every page slowly from beginning to end. Not emotionally this time. Methodically. I highlighted dates, circled recurring charges, wrote notes in the margins beside purchases that matched Brittany's social media posts. The more organized I became, the calmer I felt. That surprised me. I always assumed betrayal would feel loud and dramatic if it ever happened to me. Instead, it felt cold, administrative, like cleaning out a house after a funeral. One receipt showed a deposit for a Disney VIP experience package purchased almost 3 months earlier. Another listed airfare upgrades to first class. I stared at that one for a long moment because Ethan knew how Harold and I used to save airline miles for years just to afford one upgraded seat during our anniversary trips. We treated luxury like something rare, something earned. Brittany treated it like a personality trait. My phone buzzed softly against the kitchen table again while I reviewed the paperwork. This time it was not Ethan or Brittany. It was my granddaughter Lily using Brittany's account. Grandma, are you mad at us? The message was followed by a blurry photo of her wearing Minnie Mouse ears with ice cream smeared on her cheek. My chest tightened instantly. That little girl had no idea what was happening around her. To Lily, this was just a vacation. Family memories. She did not understand stolen signatures or hidden accounts or the quiet humiliation of discovering your own. Child, watch someone drain your retirement savings without stopping them. I typed 3 different responses before deleting all of them. Finally, I wrote only one sentence. I love you very much, sweetheart. Then I set the phone face down on the table and closed my eyes. That was the cruelest part of all this. Betrayal never damages only the guilty people. It spills onto everyone standing nearby. Around 3 o'clock, Grace called from the bank. Her voice stayed calm and professional, but I could hear concern underneath it now. Margaret, I wanted to let you know there have been multiple attempts this afternoon to reactivate the disabled cards through customer service. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Did they succeed? No, she said firmly. I personally flagged the account this morning after our meeting. Nothing can be reopened without speaking directly to you in person. I thanked her quietly. Before hanging up, she hesitated for a moment. For what it is worth, she said gently, you are handling this with more grace than most people would. Grace. Funny word. I did not feel graceful. I felt old. Tired. Like someone had reached into the center of my life and rearranged the meaning of family without asking permission. But after we hung up, I realized something else too. Brittany and Ethan still believed this was temporary. An inconvenience. They thought if they pushed hard enough or apologized carefully enough, eventually I would smooth everything over the way mothers often do. They still thought this was about money. It was not. Money can be replaced. Trust cannot. As evening settled over Tampa, the sky turned soft shades of orange and pink beyond the palm trees outside my kitchen window. I heated leftover soup for dinner and carried the bowl into the living room where Harold's old recliner still sat facing the television. Sometimes I still caught myself looking toward that chair expecting him to say something during difficult moments like this. Some calm, practical sentence that made everything clearer. Instead, there was only silence and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock near the hallway. I looked around the room we spent decades building together and understood something with complete certainty for the first time since this began. Ethan and Brittany had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And people who make that mistake usually do not realize it until it is far too late. The next morning began quietly enough that for a few brief minutes, I almost forgot everything waiting for me. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen curtains in long golden strips across the floor, while the coffee maker hissed softly beside the sink. Tampa looked beautiful after the storm. The sky clear again. Palm trees moving gently in the warm breeze outside. I stood barefoot in the kitchen wearing one of Harold's old university shirts and watched a pair of squirrels chase each other along the backyard fence while I tried to remember what peace used to feel like. Then my phone rang again. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering this time. Silence greeted me at first except for loud background noise and distant voices. Then my son exhaled sharply into the phone. Mom, he said, trying to sound calm but failing badly. What exactly did you do? I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Good morning to you too, Ethan. He ignored that. Our cards stopped working this morning. All of them. The hotel says there is a fraud lock on the account. Behind his voice, I could hear Brittany speaking rapidly to someone else nearby. The sound of children crying somewhere in the distance. Hotel lobby music faintly playing overhead. For a moment, I pictured the scene perfectly without needing details. Brittany standing rigid beside the front desk with her expensive sunglasses pushed into her hair. Ethan pacing in circles trying to stay composed while strangers pretended not to stare. Lily confused and embarrassed without understanding why the adults suddenly looked panicked. Mom, Ethan said again, sharper this time. Did you report the cards? I took a sip of coffee before answering. I reported unauthorized activity on my account, yes. The silence after that stretched several seconds too long. Unauthorized. He repeated slowly like he could not believe the word itself. You are seriously calling this unauthorized? I looked toward Harold's empty chair in the living room while my son waited for an answer. Were you authorized to use my retirement account for a luxury vacation? Ethan lowered his voice immediately. Do not do this right now. That sentence told me everything. Not denial. Not confusion. Just irritation that I had finally stopped cooperating. In the background, Brittany suddenly grabbed the phone from him. Margaret, she snapped before quickly softening her tone again. There has obviously been some misunderstanding here. There was that word again. Misunderstanding. Like $38,000 simply wandered away on its own. The bank froze everything, she continued quickly. We cannot even get back into our room right now because the reservation was tied to your card. I closed my eyes briefly. Not because I felt guilty. Because even now, standing inside the consequences of her own actions, Brittany still spoke like the victim. That sounds stressful, I said quietly. Her voice cracked then for the first time since this began. Lily is here, Margaret. I knew exactly why she said it. Not because she cared about my granddaughter's feelings in that moment. Because she hoped guilt would still work on me. Mothers like me are trained our entire lives to sacrifice comfort for family harmony. To smooth over discomfort before anybody else feels it too deeply. Brittany believed I would eventually panic at the idea of disappointing Lily and reverse everything immediately. What she did not understand was that I had already spent years sacrificing myself for people who barely noticed. I love Lily very much, I told her calmly. But you should have thought about her before stealing from her grandmother. Brittany inhaled sharply like I slapped her. We did not steal anything. Then why is your name attached to a card I never approved? Another silence. Heavy this time. Real. In the distance, I heard somebody at the hotel desk explaining payment policies while luggage wheels rolled across tile floors nearby. Ethan took the phone back. His voice sounded colder now. Less frightened. More defensive. You embarrassed us, he said quietly. I stared out the kitchen window toward the bright Florida morning and felt something inside me finally go still. No, Ethan, I answered softly. You embarrassed yourselves. Then I hung up. My hands trembled afterward, but not from regret. From adrenaline. From grief. From the awful realization that there are moments in life when a parent finally sees their child clearly for the first time. And sometimes that clarity arrives too late to save the relationship at all. They came back to Tampa 2 days earlier than planned. I knew because Brittany stopped posting pictures online sometime after the hotel incident, and Ethan's messages shifted from angry to strangely formal. Short texts asking if we could talk like adults. Another asking me to please be reasonable. Reasonable. That word almost made me laugh. For years I had been reasonable while they quietly treated my savings account like an extension of their lifestyle. By Saturday afternoon, the Florida heat sat thick over the neighborhood like a damp blanket. I was trimming dead leaves off the hibiscus bushes near the front porch when Ethan's SUV pulled into the driveway. I did not wave. I simply set the gardening shears down carefully beside the flower bed and watched as both of them stepped out of the vehicle. Brittany looked different without the polished social media version of herself. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun beneath oversized sunglasses, even though clouds covered most of the sky. Ethan looked exhausted. Not remorseful. Just tired. The kind of tired people get when consequences become inconvenient. Lily stayed in the back seat staring down at a tablet while they walked toward me together. Can we come inside? Ethan asked stiffly. I looked past him toward my quiet street lined with palm trees and neatly trimmed lawns. Neighbors mowing grass. Sprinklers ticking softly across driveways. Such an ordinary Saturday for a conversation capable of ending a family. Fine, I said finally. Inside, the house felt cool and still from the air conditioning. Brittany immediately began looking uncomfortable the moment she stepped into the kitchen. Probably because this room had always belonged to Harold and me. Family photographs still lined. The walls beside old vacation magnets and Lily's childhood drawings taped carefully near the refrigerator. Real memories. Not curated online versions of them. Nobody sat down at first. Ethan paced slowly beside the kitchen counter while Brittany crossed her arms tightly over her chest. I noticed she was no longer wearing the gold necklace from Christmas. Mom, Ethan began carefully. This has gone way too far. I stared at him for several seconds before answering. $38,000 is pretty far, yes. Brittany removed her sunglasses then, revealing tired eyes underneath. We already told you there was confusion about the account setup. I walked silently toward the kitchen drawer where I had placed the folder from the bank. Then I set it down in front of them on the table with a soft thud. No, I said quietly. This is confusion. Ethan opened the folder first. I watched his face slowly change as he flipped through transaction histories, highlighted purchases, authorization forms, and printed screenshots Grace helped me prepare. Brittany leaned over his shoulder at first with visible annoyance. Then came the silence. The real kind. The kind people fall into when lies stop functioning. Ethan stopped turning pages after he reached the forged authorization signature. He stared at it for a long time without speaking. Mom, he said finally, quieter now. I did not know about this part. I believed him partially. Not fully. He probably never asked questions because asking questions would have ruined the comfort of pretending innocence. Brittany finally spoke, her voice suddenly defensive again. Everybody shares finances and families. I looked at her steadily across the table. Families ask permission. Her cheeks flushed red instantly. You have plenty of money, she snapped before catching herself too late. There it was. The truth beneath all the careful language. Not misunderstanding. Not temporary borrowing. Entitlement. Ethan closed his eyes briefly like he wished she had stayed quiet. Brittany, he muttered under his breath. But she was already unraveling now. You act like we robbed you blind, she continued sharply. It was a vacation for Lily. We were going to pay some of it back eventually. Eventually. Such a dangerous word. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, then, because suddenly I felt every single one of my 68 years pressing into my bones. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. Neither of them answered. It is not the money. My voice stayed calm even though my chest ached so badly I could barely breathe. It is realizing the two people I trusted most spent months watching me budget groceries and medication while secretly using my retirement account for luxury dinners. Ethan finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time since this began, I saw shame flicker briefly across his face. The kitchen stayed quiet after that. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that settles over people who suddenly realize there is no version of the story left that makes them look innocent. Outside, thunder rumbled softly somewhere over Tampa Bay again, even though the afternoon sky still held streaks of sunlight through the clouds. Florida storms always seemed to circle back eventually. Ethan lowered himself slowly into one of the kitchen chairs like his legs could no longer hold him upright. Brittany remained standing with her arms crossed tightly against herself, but the confidence she usually carried had started slipping away around the edges. I could see it now in the nervous tapping of her fingernails against her elbows, in the way she avoided looking directly at the folder on the table. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face before speaking again. How much do you actually know? The question almost startled me because buried inside it was an admission. Not denial. Not outrage. Just damage control. I folded my hands together carefully in my lap. Enough. Ethan stared down at the paperwork while Brittany suddenly stepped forward. This is unbelievable, she muttered. You are acting like we are criminals. I looked at her quietly. People who forge signatures usually are. She flinched at that word. Forge. Funny how language becomes uncomfortable once it stops sounding vague and starts sounding accurate. Brittany opened her mouth to argue again, but Ethan interrupted her this time. Stop. His voice came out sharper than before. She stared at him in shock. Excuse me. I said stop. He pushed the folder slightly away from himself like he could no longer stand touching it. Did you sign her name? Brittany blinked rapidly. It was not like that. Ethan laughed once under his breath. Bitter. Exhausted. That is not an answer. I watched them carefully from across the table while years of their marriage suddenly became visible in tiny cracks I had never noticed before. Brittany always talking first. Ethan always smoothing things over afterward. Brittany making decisions. Ethan pretending not to see consequences until they exploded directly in front of him. We needed help, Brittany finally snapped. Everybody else around us was moving forward while we were drowning. Ethan stared at her silently. She kept going now, like once the truth started slipping out, she could not stop it anymore. Do you know how humiliating it feels watching everyone online living better than you? She asked, her voice trembling. People judge everything now. The schools your kids go to, your vacations, your clothes. Ethan works nonstop, and we still barely keep up. I listened quietly because for the first time since this nightmare began, Brittany was finally being honest. Not kind, not remorseful, honest. So you decided my retirement account should fix that? I asked softly. Tears suddenly filled her eyes, though somehow they still looked angry instead of sorry. You had money sitting there doing nothing. The room went completely still. Ethan slowly turned toward his wife like he no longer recognized her. Doing nothing, he repeated under his breath. Brittany wiped at her face quickly, frustrated now that emotions were escaping anyway. I did not mean it like that. But she did. We all knew she did. That was the ugliest part of greed. Eventually, it stops disguising itself as need and reveals pure entitlement underneath. Ethan leaned back heavily in the chair and stared toward the living room, where Harold's old framed fishing photo still hung above the fireplace. Jesus Christ, he whispered quietly. I had not heard my son sound genuinely ashamed in years. Then he looked back at me. Mom, he said slowly, I swear to you I did not know about the signature. I believed him this time. Not because Ethan was innocent. Because his guilt looked different from Brittany's. Hers came from getting caught. His came from finally realizing what ignoring the truth had cost him. You knew enough? I answered gently. You knew your family was living beyond what you could afford. Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. Another silence filled the kitchen after that. Heavy and final. Somewhere outside, rain finally started falling again against the windows in soft, steady taps. I stood slowly from the table and carried my untouched glass of water to the sink. My hands no longer trembled now. That surprised me most of all. For days I thought this confrontation would destroy me emotionally once it finally happened. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Tired of carrying people who only loved me when my help arrived attached to a bank account. Tired of being treated like an endless safety net while nobody asked whether I still felt safe myself. And standing there in the kitchen Harold and I built together 40 years earlier, I realized something important. Some relationships do not collapse in one dramatic moment. They erode quietly over time until eventually the truth simply becomes impossible to ignore anymore. After Ethan and Brittany left that evening, the house felt strangely lighter. Not happier, just quieter in a way I had not experienced in years. The rain continued long after sunset, tapping steadily against the windows while I sat alone in the living room beneath the soft yellow light beside Harold's old recliner. Their coffee cups still sat untouched on the kitchen table, Brittany's lipstick mark faintly visible against the rim of the mug. I stared at it for a long moment before finally carrying both cups to the sink and washing them slowly under hot water. Funny how ordinary little actions suddenly feel symbolic after your life changes. By Monday morning, I was back at the bank with Grace. The folder looked thicker now because I had added printed screenshots from social media posts and copies of text messages from Ethan and Brittany over the weekend. Grace reviewed everything carefully before sliding several new documents toward me across the desk. These forms will permanently remove all linked access and place additional security restrictions on your accounts, she explained gently. I signed every page without hesitation. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in weeks. Afterward, Grace hesitated before speaking again. Margaret, I also strongly recommend updating your estate documents. I gave a small tired smile. Already scheduled. The lawyer appointment was Wednesday morning downtown. Harold and I wrote our will together years ago, sitting side by side at the dining room table while eating takeout Chinese food and arguing affectionately about whether Ethan would eventually sell this house after we were gone. Back then, the documents felt theoretical, distant, something responsible adults prepared but hoped nobody needed for a very long time. Sitting in the attorney's office now felt entirely different. Cold. Final. Mr. Delaney had silver hair and reading glasses that constantly slid down his nose while he spoke. He handled Harold's probate after the funeral 8 years ago and still remembered details about our family I had forgotten myself. He listened quietly while I explained everything. Not dramatically, just facts. Fraudulent signatures, unauthorized accounts, financial manipulation. When I finished, he removed his glasses slowly and folded his hands together. What would you like to change? He asked carefully. I looked out the office window toward downtown Tampa shimmering beneath the afternoon heat and thought about Lily. Sweet little Lily with ice cream on her cheeks and no understanding yet of how greed quietly poisons families from the inside. I want my granddaughter protected, I said finally. Not controlled. By the end of the meeting, Ethan and Brittany had been removed from every financial decision connected to my estate. A trust would be established for Lily instead, managed independently until she turned 30 years old. The house would eventually transfer directly to her. Not them. Never them. Walking back to my car afterward, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I mostly felt calm. Like somebody had finally opened a window inside a room that had been suffocating me for years. Brittany posted online again 2 days later. Not Disney photos this time. Quotes about toxic family relationships, layered over blurry sunset backgrounds. Another post about setting boundaries with manipulative people. I stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds before quietly setting my phone face down on the table. Once upon a time, those posts would have shattered me emotionally. I would have worried what relatives might think, whether neighbors would judge me, whether Ethan secretly hated me now. But something inside me had changed over the past week. Maybe grief finally reaches a point where exhaustion becomes freedom. Ethan still called occasionally after that. Short, awkward conversations mostly about Lily. Never about the money anymore. Never about Disney. Some silences become permanent once too much truth has been spoken aloud. Months later, I booked myself a small cruise leaving out of Fort Lauderdale with 3 women from my church group. Nothing extravagant. Just ocean air, card games, and quiet mornings drinking coffee beside the water without worrying who might secretly be using my kindness against me. On the final evening before departure, I stood alone on my back patio watching the Florida sunset spread orange and pink across the sky, while warm wind moved gently through the palm trees overhead. The bird feeder Harold built still hung beside the fence. The cardinals still came every morning. Life continued. Different now, but still mine. And for the first time in years, I understood something clearly. They thought I was just an old woman with a credit card. They forgot I was the woman who built everything they depended on in the first place.